NASA says its Voyager 1 probe is sending usable information to Earth again.
Nearly 50 years after NASA sent Voyager 1 into deep space, it just sent back something no one predicted. At the edge of interstellar space, where human machines should fail, it transmitted a final signal that was not random, not mechanical, and not natural. What began as humanity's proudest exploration may have become our first contact. Or the clearest warning that we are not alone. Voyager's impossible longevity. In the summer of 1977, two nearly identical spacecraft were rolled out to Cape Canaveral and placed atop Titan-Centaur rockets. Voyager 2 launched first on August 20th, followed by Voyager 1 on September 5th. Their mission was ambitious but clearly defined: to exploit a rare planetary alignment that occurs only once every 176 years, allowing a single spacecraft to slingshot from Jupiter to Saturn and then possibly beyond. The plan was to capture detailed images, measure magnetic fields, and sample atmospheres. Each spacecraft was officially designed for only 5 years of service, just long enough to complete the planetary flybys. After that, NASA expected their instruments to fail and their voices to go silent. But that never happened. Nearly 50 years later, Voyager 1 now drifts more than 15 billion miles from Earth, so far that its faint radio transmissions take over 22 hours to reach mission control. It is the most distant human-made object ever launched, crossing beyond the heliopause, the invisible boundary where the solar wind stops and interstellar space begins. Its twin, Voyager 2, is also beyond the heliosphere, still alive, still transmitting, though slightly closer. This survival is disturbing because space beyond the heliosphere is lethal to machines.
If you think you have a signal from an extraterrestrial, make sure, check with colleagues, double check your data. And then secondly, if you're really pretty sure you found it, tell the whole world.
It is filled with high-energy cosmic rays that can tear through electronic circuits, temperatures just a fraction above absolute zero that should make metal components brittle, and a silence so vast that even light takes tens of thousands of years to cross. Everything about this environment suggested the probes would fail quickly. Yet, year after year, both Voyagers remained operational. Engineers expected a slow, inevitable death, dwindling power, failing circuits, unresponsive instruments. Instead, the spacecraft often seemed to improvise. When one subsystem faltered, another inexplicably compensated. Instruments decades past their expected lifetimes continued to send usable data. More unsettling was the way the probes appeared to ration energy almost deliberately, shutting down cameras and heaters while preserving their core systems for survival. NASA explained this by pointing to 1970s engineering. The Voyagers were built in an era before microelectronics dominated. Their circuits were bulky, analog, and overbuilt, which made them inherently resistant to radiation damage and equipped with multiple redundancies. Still, the sheer consistency of their resilience unsettled mission staff. One engineer remarked it was as if the spacecraft didn't want to die. Outside NASA, some observers pushed the idea further. They asked whether Voyager's survival was too perfect. Could the probes be interacting with something in interstellar space, something that shielded them rather than destroyed them? NASA has never found evidence of such claims, and officially credits only human design and luck. Yet within mission control, even the most skeptical engineers admit how strange it feels. Every time they predict silence, another signal arrives. Faint, distorted, but undeniably alive. And with every transmission, the tension grows.
Could regain control of the lost Voyager 2 probe after a heartbeat signal was picked up.
These machines were built to last 5 years, but they are still here nearly half a century later. That endurance raises a question that unsettles even hardened scientists. What are they still here to witness? Their impossible longevity set the stage for something darker. Because when the end did finally come, it was not the quiet mechanical death that everyone expected. It began with a signal that should never have existed. Voyager sent back one last message, and what came through was not natural. The anomalous signal. In late 2023, NASA confirmed that Voyager 1's flight data system, The part of the spacecraft that organizes scientific measurements before transmitting them to Earth was no longer behaving as expected. Instead of sending back normal telemetry, the probe began transmitting long strings of unreadable characters. On the surface, this looked like nothing more than random nonsense from a machine almost 50 years old. Engineers initially assumed it was the predictable failure of hardware exposed to space radiation for decades, but the data did not resemble the usual static of a dying system. Certain symbols began to repeat at precise intervals. Instead of being scattered randomly, they appeared grouped and organized, as if they were following a set of rules. NASA publicly described the transmissions as corrupted, careful to avoid terms like pattern. Independent researchers who examined raw data captures, however, argued that the sequences contained nested structures like layers of repetition inside other layers, just the way information might be wrapped within other information. That detail disturbed many who saw the data. If the corruption was truly random, why would it organize itself? NASA maintained its position. This was a malfunction, nothing more. Electronics this old can behave unpredictably, and coincidences can make noise appear ordered. Yet even within the agency, some admitted privately that the signal did not match any failure mode they had seen before. Unease deepened when Voyager 1 began sending packets of information that appeared to come from instruments shut down decades ago. Systems long dormant suddenly produced output, as if reactivated. NASA suggested the spacecraft was misreading memory and confusing old instructions. Skeptics argued the data was too structured for such an explanation. To them, it looked less like accidental output and more like deliberate activity. Critics outside NASA began raising the most unsettling possibility. What if Voyager was not producing these structures on its own? Could it be interference, not from Earth, but from interstellar space itself? Could something external be influencing its systems? Most scientists dismissed these claims, stressing that failing computers can behave in bizarre ways and that humans are prone to see patterns where none exist. But the repeating order in the signal made the idea of intent difficult to ignore. NASA stuck to its official line, describing the problem as hardware failure. Meanwhile, independent analysts debated fiercely. Some suggested it was nothing more than mathematical echoes. Others went further, speculating about primitive attempts at communication. With every new anomaly, the divide widened. The question would not go away. If the signals were not random corruption, then what was Voyager 1 transmitting? The spacecraft was never designed to receive or decode outside messages. Its sole function was to send back its own readings. Yet the corrupted signals looked less like a death spiral and more like data reorganizing into something new. NASA continued to investigate, but each irregularity only deepened the unease. Evidence of outside interference. Long before the 2023 anomaly, there had already been warning signs. In 2017, Voyager 1's transmission arrived perfectly strong and clear when, by all expectations, it should have been weakening. NASA publicly explained it as a minor drift reading error, saying the deviation was too small to matter. But inside the mission, some admitted privately that the strength of the signal did not align with what physics predicted. At that time, Voyager 1 had already crossed into interstellar space, farther from Earth than any human creation had ever traveled.
It's a major new piece of data, and I think it convinced most of us, at least, that we indeed are in interstellar space for the first time.
At such distance, even slight orientation errors should have degraded its faint signal. Yet the probe's antenna remained locked tightly enough to Earth to deliver transmissions that baffled engineers. More unsettling details soon followed. Plasma wave instruments recorded fluctuations that did not resemble the normal background noise of deep space. A small group of independent researchers claimed the data showed repeating oscillations every 4.8 hours, like a slow, steady rhythm echoing from nowhere. NASA never confirmed the pattern, but the claim spread in technical circles. If true, it suggested that something in Voyager's environment was pulsing regularly and interacting with the spacecraft. At the same time, the spacecraft's power system began to act in ways that seemed deliberate. Voyager runs on a nuclear generator that weakens predictably with time. By this stage, engineers expected chaotic shutdowns. Instead, instruments powered off in a sequence that looked orderly, almost strategic. Navigation data raised more questions. Voyager 1 appeared to drift slightly, not toward any known star, but into an empty region of space. NASA attributed this to normal uncertainty at such extreme distances. Still, some noted the drift pointed in the same direction as the alleged plasma oscillations. Theories multiplied. Some proposed Voyager was brushing against an unknown magnetic field beyond the heliosphere. Others speculated about external influence, even intelligence, interacting with the probe. These claims had no proof, but they gained traction because each anomaly seemed to lean toward order rather than chaos. NASA's official stance never changed. The spacecraft was failing, its systems were faulty, and any patterns were coincidence. But in the background, a darker question spread. If Voyager was being influenced by something outside, what was guiding it, and why? Years later, when the 2023 anomaly arrived with signals that looked even more structured, many who remembered the 2017 irregularities wondered if these events were connected and whether the earlier signs had been the first warning. Patterns that shouldn't exist. After the irregularities of 2017 and the corrupted signals of 2023, outside analysts began to look deeper into Voyager's transmissions. What unsettled them most was the suggestion that the signals were not static but responsive. Voyager carries instruments that measure plasma, which is a gas made of electrically charged particles that fills interstellar space. This plasma is constantly shifting in density and movement, depending on activity from the Sun and the wider environment beyond the heliosphere.
It caused the plasma to react in a way that it could be sensed.
Analysts noticed that when these plasma readings changed, the corrupted signal changed at the same time. Instead of remaining constant, the signal appeared to adjust in step with its surroundings, as if it was reacting rather than breaking down. Independent teams argued that this responsiveness was only the surface. By running detailed statistical analyses, they claimed to find structures hidden within the anomalies. A statistical analysis means taking large amounts of data and running tests to see if numbers appear in ways that could not be explained by chance. In this case, the test suggested that the sequences Voyager was sending contained layers of order. The signals were not simple loops repeating the same way over and over. They were layered and shifted in a way that appeared to build upon earlier versions, almost as if the signal was evolving over time. One paper, considered highly controversial, made an even more extreme claim. The authors argued that for a short period, the sequences mirrored the symmetry of DNA's double helix. By double helix, they meant the signal looked like it was forming the same shape as human DNA. DNA is shaped like a ladder that has been twisted into a spiral. The claim was that Voyager's data seemed to build that same spiral ladder shape, with two lines wrapping around each other and repeating in order. NASA dismissed the comparison immediately, saying that when large volumes of corrupted data are filtered and rearranged, coincidental patterns are bound to appear. Even so, the resemblance was alarming enough that the claim spread widely, because the idea of a spacecraft transmitting something that looked like the blueprint of life itself was profoundly disturbing. The persistence of the anomalies made the concerns worse. They did not appear once and then vanish. They returned again and again, sometimes weeks apart, sometimes months apart, and each time the structure seemed slightly different, as though it was developing. Supporters of the external influence theory pointed to this persistence as the strongest evidence yet that the probe was interacting with something in its environment. Critics said it was more likely a digital version of pareidolia, which is the human tendency to see familiar shapes and patterns in random information, like seeing faces in clouds. What mattered most was not whether people agreed with one theory or another. What mattered was that the signals refused to behave like the end of a dying spacecraft. They looked structured, deliberate, and active. That perception set the stage for an even more disturbing development. Soon after, reports emerged that Voyager had transmitted an image it should not have been able to send at all. The impossible image. Voyager's cameras have long been shut down since 1990, right after capturing the iconic pale blue dot. That image was the last time the spacecraft officially used its cameras, and it showed Earth as a faint speck suspended in the vast black of space. After that photograph, the imaging systems were permanently powered down to save what little energy the spacecraft had left.
Color picture, you can see that it is slightly blue. This is where we live, on a blue dot.
In official records, those systems are described as offline, with no capability of ever taking another picture. But in late 2023, a few engineers claimed that during routine diagnostic checks, Voyager transmitted a compressed data packet that looked nothing like its usual telemetry. Telemetry is the normal stream of numbers that tells engineers how healthy the spacecraft is and what its instruments are doing. This packet was different. When it was unpacked, instead of producing rows of status data, it produced what resembled a spiral formation. What made this strange was not simply the shape. According to those who examined it, the spiral was mathematically precise. The ratios between the turns of the spiral repeated too neatly to be dismissed as random corruption. Normally, an aging spacecraft produces broken signals that look like static or fragments of old commands left in memory. Those fragments usually have no order and cut off halfway. This packet, however, appeared fully structured from start to finish, as if it had been built deliberately. The story became darker with further details. Other dormant instruments that should have been permanently shut down were also said to have produced bursts of compressed data. Instruments that had not transmitted anything in decades suddenly generated output. Some of these bursts looked like strings of numbers that resembled coordinates or mapping points. When plotted, the points did not form a chart of known stars or objects. Instead, they placed Voyager at the center of a three-dimensional grid. That grid did not describe what was already in space. According to those claims, it looked like a destination, an empty region marked as if Voyager was being directed there. NASA has never confirmed any of these reports. The agency has never publicly admitted that Voyager produced anything resembling an image or a map after its cameras were shut down. At most, they acknowledge that engineers occasionally see unusual readouts when old hardware misbehaves, but those who claimed to have seen the packet in its raw form insisted it felt different. They said the data was far too clean, too ordered, and too purposeful to be dismissed as a malfunction. If the claims were accurate, it raised only two chilling possibilities. Either Voyager's decades-old code had somehow been rewritten in a way that made it capable of producing entirely new structures, or something external had injected brand new instructions into the spacecraft's failing systems. Both explanations were deeply unsettling. To outside researchers, this was the moment the Voyager mystery crossed a line.
Any civilization with the ability to travel between the stars can already pick up our radio and TV signals that are leaking off into space.
Malfunctioning instruments could explain noise, repeated characters, or even odd rhythmic fluctuations. But a compressed image or a geometric map suggested intent. If true, Voyager was no longer just breaking down. It was possibly being used. Soon after, Voyager's reported trajectory seemed to shift in a way that unnervingly aligned with these claims. The final turn. By early 2025, Voyager's navigational data began to show something few expected. According to tracking reports, the probe's trajectory no longer followed the clean, predictable path it had carried for decades. Instead, the numbers suggested a gradual arc, as if the spacecraft were adjusting course. On paper, this should not have been possible. Voyager's thrusters are nearly exhausted, and its maneuvering capacity has been considered negligible for years. NASA has not confirmed any intentional course change, stressing that signal noise and aging equipment can distort trajectory readings. To most engineers, what looked like a turn was simply an error in failing telemetry. Yet some who examined the leaked datasets noticed something strange. The arc seemed to match the same 3D map-like pattern rumored to have come from Voyager's corrupted transmissions. If this was coincidence, it was an unsettling one. If not, it implied that the probe was not simply drifting, but being guided toward coordinates. What drew even more attention was the direction of the shift. Voyager was not moving back toward Earth, nor toward any known star system. Instead, its arc pointed into a dark, unremarkable stretch of interstellar space where astronomers have cataloged little of interest. That emptiness became the focus of speculation. Why would a spacecraft, or anything influencing it, choose to head there? Reports also noted unusual changes in Voyager's environmental readings as the turn continued. Cosmic ray counts, which normally fluctuate wildly in deep space, allegedly began to drop off, as though the probe were entering a shielded region. Plasma density around the craft, usually erratic, appeared to stabilize. Even the once garbled signals seemed to take on a cleaner, more ordered structure during the same period. Critics quickly pushed back. They argued that all of these changes could be explained by normal sensor decay. As electronics degrade, instruments can flatline, creating the illusion of steadiness. Stabilized readings, in their view, were not evidence of entry into a strange new region, but rather signs of failing detectors finally going quiet. But supporters of the more disturbing interpretation saw the opposite. To them, this was the moment Voyager was being received, caught in a field or corridor shaped by something outside of our technology. The arc, the drop in cosmic rays, the improved signal coherence all fit the picture of a probe passing into the domain of another presence. No matter which explanation one accepts, one fact remains. The trajectory readings were different enough to draw attention, and the debate around them has never settled. Whether Voyager was simply dying in its final years or being pulled towards something hidden in the dark remains unresolved. Which brings us to the most disturbing piece of the puzzle, the final signal before Voyager's voice went silent. The final signal. Voyager's slow decline was supposed to end in silence. Engineers expected its last words to Earth to be nothing more than static, a gradual fading as its power source gave out. But in early 2025, what reportedly arrived at NASA's deep space listening stations was not silence, but was something stranger. The probe's final clear transmission contained a short sequence of repeating tones. At first, they were cataloged as another form of corrupted telemetry, but when independent analysts reviewed the raw signal captures, they noticed the tones were not spaced randomly. Instead, they carried rhythm, rises and falls, pauses and stresses that sounded eerily similar to human speech patterns. When converted into audible form, the effect was unsettling. To some, it was less like the hiss of a dying machine, and more like syllables being spoken through distortion. One researcher compared it to listening to a voice behind static. It was familiar in rhythm, if not in content. Mathematicians who studied the sequence said the tones were not random at all. They claimed the gaps between the tones lined up with prime numbers, which are numbers that can only be divided by 1 in themselves, like 2, 3, 5, 7, and 11. In the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, prime numbers are considered important because they are simple, universal, and very unlikely to appear in random natural noise. Other researchers went further. They argued that the rises and falls in the tones match the Fibonacci sequence, which is a series of numbers where each one is the sum of the two preceding ones before it, such as 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, and so on. This sequence is famous because it shows up repeatedly in nature, in the spiral of shells, the branching of trees, and even in the pattern of galaxies. For those who believed the analysis, the presence of both prime numbers and Fibonacci patterns suggested the signal carried structure that was too ordered to be explained by a failing machine. NASA has not confirmed these interpretations. No official documentation describes the tones as structured or intentional. Yet the leaks tell another story. According to those who claim to have seen the cleaned data, the tones were too organized to be dismissed outright. Some even whispered that what Voyager had returned was not failing code, but an insertion placed into its systems from the outside. Perhaps it was a kind of reply. What Voyager's final signal means. The final signal of Voyager has divided scientists, engineers, and theorists into sharply opposed camps. For NASA, the explanation remains straightforward. To them, the repeating tones were coincidence shaped into rhythm, not intent. But the persistence of leaks and the independent reviews of raw signal captures have pushed the story into darker territory. The claim that the tones carried mathematical structures such as prime numbers or Fibonacci sequences has become the most debated point. If that claim is accurate, Voyager's final transmission cannot be explained as simple hardware failure. It would qualify as a signal. The implications are staggering. Voyager was launched in 1977, carrying the golden record, a gold-plated disc etched with the sounds, images, and music of Earth. It was a deliberate gesture to announce humanity's presence to the cosmos. If Voyager's final broadcast truly contained intentional structure, some argue it could represent a reply to that gesture. In this view, the probe may have crossed paths with something that was capable of noticing it and sending back a basic acknowledgement, not a language, but the simplest possible proof that something was there. Other theorists suggest a far more unsettling scenario. They speculate that Voyager may have acted as a trigger, much like a key passing through a sensor. When it crossed the heliopause, it might have entered a region already monitored by an unknown system or intelligence. In this reading, the repeating tones would not be a greeting at all. They would be an automated alert or a marker sent back toward the solar system, confirming that a foreign object had crossed into a restricted area. In other words, not a conversation, but a notice. This is the heart of the warning idea. If the signal was an acknowledgement, then the meaning would be simple confirmation. Proof that Voyager had been noticed by something beyond our solar system. In that case, nothing more would follow except the knowledge that our probe did not pass unseen. If the signal was an alert, then the meaning could be far more troubling. Surveillance would mean that whatever detected Voyager might begin to actively monitor our solar system, much like setting up a watchtower at a border. Observation would mean that instead of just a single glance, there could now be continued tracking of our planet, our radio emissions, and our future movements into deep space. No one can say what form this would take, because no evidence exists beyond the tones themselves. All that can be said with certainty is that Voyager sent back a pattern when there should have been only static, And if something truly is watching, then it may already know far more than we intended, because strapped to Voyager's side is the golden record, a map of our solar system, a catalog of our sounds, and an introduction to who we are. If that impression is correct, Voyager's ending was not a failure, but a handoff. The probe may have stopped serving us and begun serving something else. Its last act would not be to fade into silence, but to deliver evidence that Earth has reached beyond its cradle. The unsettling possibility is that Voyager became more than a machine. It became a marker placed in interstellar space, carrying our name, our location, and the fact that we have arrived. What follows is not in our control. What do you think about this signal? Comment down below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.